The diplomatic shuttle's interior smelled wrong. James Kovac had spent enough time in military transports to know that spacecraft had a particular odor: recycled air, metal, the faint tang of coolant systems working overtime. But this vessel carried something else. Incense, maybe, or whatever the Zarathi equivalent was. Something that made his sinuses itch and reminded him he was entering territory where even the air didn't follow human expectations. He adjusted his dress uniform for the fifth time in as many minutes, checking the alignment of medals he'd earned during a war he'd been trying to forget. The Battle of Threshold Station ribbon sat among them, dark blue with silver edging, representing humanity's closest brush with complete defeat. Kovac had received it along with everyone who survived that nightmare, which wasn't nearly as many people as had started the battle. "Commander Kovac, we're beginning final approach to the Palace landing platform." The shuttle pilot's voice carried the professional calm of someone who'd ferried enough dignitaries to master emotional neutrality. "Zarathi Traffic Control is requesting we maintain our current vector. They're very particular about their airspace." "Understood." Kovac moved to the viewport, watching as the Zarathi capital city resolved from abstract shapes into impossible architecture. Crystalline spires that shouldn't support their own weight reached toward a sky that shifted between violet and deep blue. Gardens floated on platforms held aloft by technology humanity still couldn't replicate, vegetation in colors that Earth's evolutionary history had never bothered producing. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, captivating and entirely capable of killing you. 5 years since the Battle of Threshold Station. 5 years since the armistice that stopped the war before either side completely destroyed the other. And in all that time, Kovac had received exactly zero communication from the Zarathi Empire until 3 weeks ago when a formal summons arrived, transmitted through official diplomatic channels, requesting his presence by name. Not requesting, commanding really, though the translation software had tried to soften the language. The Zarathi didn't request when their queen wanted something. They expected compliance and considered alternatives to be insults worthy of response. The Terran diplomatic corps had been baffled. Kovac wasn't a diplomat, wasn't politically connected, wasn't anyone who should merit personal attention from an alien monarch. He was a mid-ranking military officer who'd taken early retirement after the war, who now taught tactical theory at the academy and tried not to dream about explosions and dying ships. "Any idea what this is about, sir?" his escort officer had asked during the briefing before departure. Kovac had told the truth, none whatsoever. The shuttle touched down with barely a whisper of repulsors, Zarathi landing technology being significantly more refined than humanity's mechanical approach. The hatch opened, and Kovac stepped onto a platform that appeared to be carved from a single piece of dark stone, polished to a mirror finish, and inlaid with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Something about the geometry that human visual processing didn't handle well. 6 Zarathi guards waited in formation, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming like polished obsidian in the planet's unusual light. Each stood roughly 7 feet tall, with 4 arms folded in postures that Kovac's combat training identified as relaxed but ready. Their faces were insected in structure, compound eyes reflecting his image 1,000 times over, mandibles held in what might be neutral expressions or might be barely contained aggression. He'd fought enough Zarathi to know they were dangerous, but he'd also learned that their body language didn't translate well to human instincts. The lead guard, distinguishable by additional gold markings on her armor, spoke in the clicking, chittering language of the Zarathi. A translation device on Kovac's collar rendered it into Terran standard with a slight delay. "Commander James Kovac of the Terran Coalition, you are expected. Follow." "Not welcome," he noted, "just expected." That could mean anything from honored guest to prisoner, depending on context he didn't have. They moved through corridors that defied his sense of direction. walls curving in ways that seemed to change the space's dimensions, floors that sloped gently upward even when his inner ear insisted they were level. Zarathi architecture apparently regarded Euclidean geometry as a suggestion rather than a rule. Other Zarathi passed in the corridors, civilians, he assumed, based on their lack of armor, and every one of them stopped to stare at the human being escorted through their palace. Kavek had studied Zarathi culture in the academy, had read the reports from xenoanthropologists and diplomatic specialists. He knew they were matriarchal, that their queen held absolute authority, that their society valued honor and directness in ways that sometimes clashed with human diplomatic subtlety. He knew their military tactics, their weapons capabilities, their typical strategic thinking. What he didn't know was why he was here. His mind kept circling back to the battle, trying to extract details from memories he'd worked hard to bury. Threshold Station had been a disaster from the start. Zarathi forces hitting them with overwhelming numbers, boarding parties cutting through defensive lines, desperate fighting in corridors and maintenance tunnels, where rank and tactics meant less than staying alive. He remembered explosions, decompression alarms, the screaming of metal and people, firing his weapon until it overheated, and then fighting with whatever came to hand. But nothing in those memories explained a personal summons from the Zarathi queen 5 years later. The guards stopped before a massive doorway that appeared to be grown rather than built, organic curves suggesting it had been coaxed into shape rather than carved. Beyond it, Kavek could hear something, voices in Zarathi, the clicking and chittering that their translation devices struggled to render into human phonemes, a sound like wind chimes made from crystal. The lead guard turned to face him, her compound eyes unreadable. "The queen awaits. You will show respect appropriate to her station. You will speak only when addressed. You will not approach the throne platform without permission." Standard diplomatic protocol, probably, though delivered with the weight of threat. Kavek nodded, checked his uniform one last time, and reminded himself that he'd survived worse than a court audience. The doors opened, revealing a chamber that stole whatever breath the architecture hadn't already taken. The throne room existed in dimensions Kavek's brain struggled to process. The walls seemed to breathe, bioluminescent patterns flowing across surfaces that might have been stone, or might have been something organic, pulsing in rhythms that almost matched a heartbeat. The ceiling soared upward into shadows that gravity seemed to forget, with crystalline formations hanging suspended in ways that violated physics, or simply operated on principles humanity hadn't discovered yet. The air itself felt different here, thicker, charged with something that made the hair on his arms stand up. Zarathi nobility filled the space in carefully arranged formations, their exoskeletons displaying rank through color variations and metallic inlays that caught the bioluminescent light. Hundreds of compound eyes turned toward him as he entered, tracking his movement with the predatory focus of beings whose ancestors had been apex hunters long before they developed civilization. Kavek's combat instincts screamed warnings about being surrounded by potential hostiles, but he forced his shoulders to relax, his stride to remain steady. At the center of it all, elevated on a platform of what appeared to be living crystal that grew from the floor in geometric impossibilities, sat the queen. She was larger than the guards, easily 8 feet tall even seated, her exoskeleton a deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Gold patterns traced across her carapace in designs that Kavek's xenoanthropology briefings had identified as royal lineage markers. The more complex the pattern, the older the bloodline. Hers looked like someone had mapped constellations onto her body. 4 arms rested in positions that might have been relaxed or might have been coiled readiness, each ending in hands that possessed both the dexterity for fine manipulation and the strength to crush human bones without effort. Her face was angular, mandibles framing a mouth that could articulate sounds human vocal cords couldn't reproduce, and above it all, compound eyes that held depths Kavak couldn't begin to read. They fixed on him as he approached, and he felt the weight of that attention like a physical force. The lead guard gestured for him to stop at a respectful distance from the throne platform. Kavak stood at attention, military discipline overriding the urge to shift his weight nervously. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the soft chittering of Zarathi communication happening at frequencies his translator couldn't catch. The queen leaned forward slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him wonder if Zarathi compound eyes could perceive things human vision missed. When she spoke, her voice was a complex layering of clicks and harmonic tones that the translation device on his collar struggled to render into Terran standard, the words arriving with a half-second delay that made conversation surreal. "Commander James Kavak, you came. Your Majesty summoned me, I came." He kept his voice level, respectful, trying not to let his confusion show, though I confess I don't understand why. A ripple of movement went through the assembled Zarathi, antennae adjusting, mandibles clicking in what might have been surprise or disapproval at his directness. The queen's primary right hand made a gesture that caused the court to fall silent. Honesty, good. Her head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck, compound eyes reflecting his image in fractal repetition. I will be equally direct. Do you remember me, human? The question hit him like a weapon. Kavak's mind raced through 5 years of memories, searching for any interaction with Zarathi royalty and finding nothing but combat footage and diplomatic briefings. He'd never met the queen before today. He was certain of it. "I don't understand, Your Majesty. This is our first meeting." "Is it?" She rose from her throne with fluid grace that belied her size, descending the crystal platform with footsteps that made no sound. The guards tensed but didn't move to stop her as she approached to within 10 feet of Kavak, close enough that he could see the fine details of her exoskeleton, the way the gold patterns seemed to pulse with their own light. Battle of Threshold Station. 5 years, 7 months, 14 days ago by your calendar. Sector 7 of the station, Deck 12, Corridor 42. Kavak's heart rate spiked. That was specific, too specific to be random. "I was there," he said carefully. "That sector saw heavy fighting, boarding parties, decompression events, close quarters combat." "Yes." The queen's antennae moved in ways his briefings hadn't covered. "Describe what you remember." He closed his eyes, pulling up memories he'd worked hard to suppress. Chaos. Our defensive line had collapsed. Zarathi boarding teams were pushing through the station deck by deck. I was separated from my unit trying to reach an evacuation point. There were explosions, hull breaches, systems failing. He paused, sorting through fragments of traumatic recall. A section of corridor was exposed to vacuum. Decompression alarms. I saw someone, a Zarathi soldier caught in the pull, holding onto a support beam, losing their grip. "And what did you do?" The memory crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. "There was a bulkhead door, manual override. I got to the controls, sealed the section, stopped the decompression." He opened his eyes, meeting those impossible compound eyes. "I pulled them away from the breach before sealing it. Never got a clear look at their face. Too much smoke, emergency lighting was failing, and I was focused on not dying myself." Silence stretched across the throne room. Every Zarathi present seemed to have stopped breathing, if they even breathed the way humans did. The queen's voice, when it came, carried something that the translator rendered as emotion but felt more complex than human equivalents. "That soldier was me, Commander Kavak. Before my ascension to the throne, I served as a military commander during the war. My ship was boarded during the Battle of Threshold Station. I led a team into the station's interior to disable your defensive systems. The mission went badly. Explosions damaged the hull. I was caught in decompression, certain I would die in the void." Kavak's world tilted sideways. The wounded Zarathi he'd pulled from the breach. The split-second decision to save an enemy combatant instead of leaving them to die. That had been the current queen of the Zarathi Empire. You saved my life, she continued, her four arms moving in gestures that seemed both formal and personal. Violated every tactical principle, made yourself vulnerable to attack, wasted precious seconds that could have ensured your own escape. And you did it for an enemy whose forces were killing your people throughout that station. A Zarathi noble near the front, his exoskeleton scarred and marked with military decorations, spoke up in their clicking language, translated as, "Your Majesty, this human also killed thousands of our people during the war. His service record shows 37 confirmed Zarathi casualties in direct combat alone. And I killed 41 humans during my military service," the Queen replied, not taking her eyes off Kavak. "War makes enemies of those who might otherwise have understood each other. But in that corridor, for reasons I have spent 5 years trying to comprehend, one human soldier chose to see a person who needed help rather than an enemy who deserved death." Kavak found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "I didn't know who you were, didn't know your rank or your importance, just saw someone about to die and had the ability to prevent it." "Precisely." The Queen's mandibles moved in what Kavak's instincts suddenly interpreted as a smile, though the expression was too alien to be certain. "You made a choice in half a second that has haunted me for 5 years. I ascended to the throne 2 years after that battle, following my mother's death. I have navigated complex politics, brokered the peace between our peoples, and managed an empire that still struggles to understand why we stopped fighting. But I never forgot the human who saved me when he had no reason to, who expected no reward, who simply acted according to principles that transcended the conflict." Another noble spoke, this one female with deep purple markings. "Your Majesty, what are the political implications of acknowledging this debt publicly? How will our people react to knowing their queen owes her life to a former enemy?" The Queen turned to address her court, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Our people will understand that honor transcends species, that the resonance bond is our oldest tradition, and that debts of life are sacred regardless of who holds them." She gestured with her secondary left arm in a sweeping motion. "I invoke the resonance bond. Commander James Kavak saved my life at risk to his own, expecting no reward and receiving no recognition until this moment. By our oldest laws, he is now under my personal protection and entitled to claim a favor equal to the life he preserved." The court erupted in controlled chaos, rapid clicking, antenna movements. What Kavak assumed was urgent debate about the wisdom of binding the Queen to a human through their most sacred tradition. He stood at the center of it, a soldier who'd expected a diplomatic meeting, and instead found himself tied to an alien monarch through a decision made in the heat of battle 5 years ago. The Queen raised her primary right hand, and silence fell like a blade. She looked at Kavak with those impossible eyes, and he realized she was waiting for his response to a question she hadn't asked yet. "What do you want, Commander Kavak? What favor will you claim in exchange for my life?" He'd trained for combat, for leadership, for tactical decision-making under pressure. Nothing had prepared him for this moment, standing before an alien queen in a throne room full of beings who had every reason to resent his presence, being asked to name his price for an act of basic humanity he'd performed without thinking. "I don't know," he said honestly, because lying to someone whose life you'd saved seemed worse than admitting confusion. "I didn't save you expecting payment. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The Queen's antennae moved in what he was learning to recognize as approval. "Then you will stay here, as my guest, until you decide what a life is worth. And perhaps, Commander Kavak, we will both discover whether fate or simple human decency has just changed the future of 2 empires." The throne room's controlled chaos reminded Kavak of bridge communications during a battle, multiple conversations happening simultaneously, each urgent, each competing for priority. Zarathi nobles clustered in groups, their antennae moving in rapid patterns that suggested heated discussion, while others approached the throne platform with what appeared to be formal objections or counsel. The bioluminescent walls pulsed faster, as if the room itself was responding to the tension. The queen remained on the lower level, closer to Kavak than protocol probably allowed, her compound eyes never leaving his face. He'd fought Zarathi in close quarters, had learned to read their body language for combat purposes, but this was different. She wasn't assessing him as a threat. She was studying him like a puzzle that might have multiple solutions. A Zarathi general pushed forward from the crowd, his exoskeleton bearing the kind of scars that only came from surviving battles that killed everyone around you. Deep gouges traced across his carapace, several segments showing repair work where damage had been too severe to heal naturally. When he spoke, his voice carried the rasp of someone who'd breathed too much combat smoke. "Your Majesty, I must object." The translator rendered his words with military formality. "This human service record is public information. 37 confirmed Zarathi casualties in direct combat. He destroyed 2 of our assault ships during the siege of Arcturus colony. His tactical innovations at the Battle of Kepler's Gate cost us an entire battalion." The general's 4 arms gestured sharply. "Yes, he saved your life, but he also took the lives of our people. How can we honor him for one act while ignoring the others?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through sections of the court. Kavak felt the weight of hundreds of compound eyes on him, felt the shift in the room's atmosphere from curious to potentially hostile. His hand wanted to reach for a sidearm that wasn't there, combat instincts screaming at him to prepare for a fight he couldn't possibly win. The queen's primary right hand made a cutting gesture that silenced the general mid-breath. "General Thax, your objection is noted and understood, but tell me, how many humans did you kill during your military service?" Thax's antennae flattened against his head. 63 confirmed, Your Majesty, more probables that were never verified. "And do you consider yourself a monster for following orders during wartime? For fighting to protect our people against what you believed was an existential threat?" "No, Your Majesty." "Then extend the same logic to Commander Kavak." She turned back to the general, her posture shifting into something that even Kavak recognized as barely contained authority. "We were at war. Both sides committed acts in service of that war. Both sides lost people we valued, mourned, still miss. The question before us is not whether Commander Kavak killed our people. He did, just as we killed his. The question is whether we acknowledge that even in war, there are moments that transcend the conflict, actions that reveal character beyond the uniform." Another noble spoke up, this one wearing robes marked with symbols Kavak's briefings had identified as confusion. "I had been fighting humans for 2 years at that point. I understood their weapons, their strategies, their approach to warfare. But I did not understand why one would waste precious seconds saving an enemy. I thought perhaps he didn't recognize me as Zarathi. The smoke was thick, visibility poor. But then I saw him look directly at me, see my exoskeleton, my 4 arms, understand exactly what I was, and still pull me to safety before sealing the breach." She moved closer to Kavak, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns in her compound eyes, the way each facet caught light differently. "I thought about that moment every day of the war that followed. Tried to reconcile the human who saved me with the humans I was fighting. Wondered if it was aberration, or if perhaps we had misunderstood your species entirely." "And which conclusion did you reach?" Kavak asked, finding his voice despite the surreal nature of discussing philosophy with an alien monarch while her court debated his fate. "That you are complicated in ways we failed to account for." Her mandibles moved in that almost smile expression. "Our intelligence assessments focused on human military capability, resource distribution, strategic thinking. We understood you as enemies. We never tried to understand you as people who might make choices based on principles that superseded immediate tactical advantage." Thax spoke again, his tone less confrontational but still skeptical. "Your Majesty, even accepting the validity of the resonance bond, what is your intention? The commander has stated he doesn't know what favor to claim. We cannot leave this situation unresolved indefinitely." The Queen turned to address her full court, her voice projecting with practiced ease. "Commander Kavak will remain here as my personal guest under the protection of the resonance bond. He will be given quarters, provided with cultural education, and afforded the respect due to one who holds a life debt from the throne. During this time, he will come to understand our people beyond what war taught him, and we will come to understand the humans beyond what war taught us. And if he claims a favor that conflicts with our empire's interests," a noble near the back called out, "then we will negotiate as the resonance bond allows." The Queen's antennae rose in what Kavak was learning meant emphasis. "But I do not believe Commander Kavak will make unreasonable demands. His actions 5 years ago suggest a person who values life over advantage, who makes decisions based on principle rather than gain. That is precisely why his choice in that corridor matters." A noble in deep crimson robe stepped forward, her exoskeleton marked with age and elaborate jewelry that denoted high rank. "Your Majesty, I served your mother for 40 years before her death. I have watched you navigate impossibly complex politics since your ascension. This decision you make now, binding yourself to a human through the resonance bond, it will have consequences beyond what we can predict." "I know, Elder Civ." The Queen's voice softened slightly, showing deference Kavak hadn't heard before. "But some decisions must be made despite unpredictable consequences. Commander Kavak's choice to save me was one such decision. My choice to honor that debt is another." Elder Civ's antennae tilted in what seemed like acceptance if not full agreement. "Then I will support this decision, though I counsel caution in how it proceeds. The commander should be educated in our customs quickly. Ignorance of our ways may lead to unintended insults that the resonance bond cannot protect him from." "Agreed." The Queen gestured to a Zarathi standing near the throne platform, this one wearing robes that marked administrative function. "Sareth will serve as cultural liaison and translator. Commander Kavak, Sareth speaks Terran standard fluently and understands human social norms better than most of our people. Consider him your guide to navigating our society." Sareth approached and performed a gesture with his 4 arms that the translator helpfully noted was a formal greeting between equals. He was smaller than the guards, his exoskeleton a lighter gray-blue, and his compound eyes seemed to hold something that might have been amusement. "I look forward to the challenge, Commander," Sareth said in Terran standard that carried only the slightest accent. "It has been several years since I've had the opportunity to educate someone in basic Zarathi etiquette. Your timing in saving the Queen's life was excellent from a dramatic standpoint, though somewhat inconvenient politically." Despite everything, Kavak felt himself smile. "Story of my military career. Excellent timing, questionable judgment." The Queen made a sound that the translator struggled to render, settling on amused acknowledgement. She returned to her throne, ascending the crystal platform with the same fluid grace, and when she spoke again her voice carried the formal weight of official pronouncement. "The resonance bond is declared and recognized. Commander James Kavak is under the throne's protection and entitled to claim favor equal to the life preserved. This court session is concluded. We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss the treaty amendments that Ambassador Thuron has been requesting for 3 months, and that we have been conveniently ignoring." That last part got scattered reactions that the translator rendered as laughter, and Kavak realized the Queen had just used his dramatic entrance to deflect from other political issues. She was more than just a warrior who'd survived to rule. She was a tactician playing games he was only beginning to perceive. The nobles began dispersing, though many cast glances at Kavak that ranged from curious to hostile to simply baffled. Sareth touched his arm gently with one hand, a gesture that seemed to be offering guidance. "Come, Commander. I'll show you to your quarters and begin the lengthy process of teaching you how not to accidentally insult anyone at tomorrow's formal dinner." He paused, mandibles moving in what might have been a smile. "Though given that you've already bound yourself to the Queen through a sacred tradition you didn't know existed, perhaps we're past worrying about minor social errors." Kavek followed Sereth toward a side exit, casting one last look at the Queen on her throne. She was already in conversation with Elder Siv and several other advisors, four arms gesturing in complex patterns, compound eyes reflecting the bioluminescent light. She'd remembered him, had spent 5 years thinking about a split-second decision made in the chaos of battle, had summoned him across interstellar space to honor a debt that he hadn't even known existed. And now he was tied to her through laws he didn't understand, in a court full of people who had every reason to resent his presence, trying to figure out what a human life was worth to an alien queen who'd already decided it was worth saving. The quarters they'd assigned Kavek occupied an entire section of what Sereth cheerfully called the lesser diplomatic wing, which apparently meant it was only palatial rather than impossibly luxurious. The walls curved with that same organic architecture that defined Zarathi building philosophy, surfaces shifting between what looked like polished stone and something that might have been living material. Bioluminescent patterns traced the ceiling in designs that probably meant something in Zarathi cultural context, but just looked beautiful to human eyes. The furniture was the challenge. Chairs designed for beings with 4 arms and different joint articulation, a sleeping platform that was too high and too hard by human standards, and what might have been a desk or might have been abstract art. Kavek honestly couldn't tell. He'd requested basic human accommodations, and within an hour a team of Zarathi staff had delivered a standard-issue military cot and a folding chair that looked absurdly mundane against the alien architecture. Sereth had left him to settle in, promising to return in what he called the evening cycle, though Kavek's internal clock was already confused by the planet's longer rotation period. He'd taken the opportunity to shower in a bathroom clearly designed for Zarathi physiology, where the water came from directions that defied plumbing logic, and the temperature controls required a brief tutorial. Now he sat on the too-hard sleeping platform, still damp from the shower, staring at his datapad and the 17 unread messages from Terran Command. He opened the most recent one from Admiral Chen, his former commanding officer. "Kavek, what the hell did you do? The diplomatic corps is having collective fits. The Zarathi Queen publicly declared a resonance bond with you. Do you have any idea the political implications? Call immediately. We need damage control strategies. Also, good work, I guess. Chen out." Kavek smiled despite himself. Trust Chen to simultaneously panic and offer congratulations in the same breath. A chime sounded, the Zarathi equivalent of a doorbell, a harmonic tone that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Kavek pulled on the casual shirt he'd packed and called out "Enter," hoping that was the right protocol. The door opened with organic smoothness, and Sereth entered carrying what appeared to be a stack of data tablets and holographic projectors. Behind him came 2 younger Zarathi carrying a piece of furniture that, when assembled, turned into something approximating a human-compatible desk. "I took the liberty of requisitioning educational materials," Sereth said, directing the furniture placement with gestures from his secondary arms while his primary hands arranged the tablets. "If you're going to survive more than 3 days in this court without causing a diplomatic incident, you'll need accelerated cultural immersion." "That bad?" "Commander, you're a human war veteran in the palace of an empire you fought against 5 years ago, bound to the Queen through a tradition most humans don't know exists, surrounded by nobles who range from curious to actively hostile." Sereth's mandibles moved in what Kavek was learning to recognize as dry amusement. "Yes, it's that bad, but also unprecedented and potentially transformative for our people's relations, so there's that." The younger Zarathi departed, leaving Kavak alone with Sarath and enough reading material to occupy several lifetimes. One of the tablets displayed a rotating hologram of Zarathi court hierarchy, complete with noble house affiliations and political alliances that looked like someone had tried to map a spider web in 4 dimensions. "We'll start with the basics," Sarath said, activating another tablet. "The resonance bond you've entered is our oldest tradition. It predates our technological civilization by several thousand years, originating in a time when Zarathi clans were nomadic and survival often depended on reciprocal obligations. So I've bound myself to ancient law that I don't understand." "Fantastic. You've bound yourself to the Queen through ancient law, which is both more complicated and potentially more advantageous." Sarath pulled up historical texts that scrolled past in Zarathi script before the translator rendered them into Terran standard. "The bond creates a formal connection that the court must respect. In practical terms, it means you're under her personal protection. Anyone who harms you or insults you directly is insulting the throne itself, and the favor I'm entitled to claim. Theoretically unlimited in scope, constrained only by reasonableness and the Queen's ability to grant it." Sarath's antennae tilted forward. "Historically, those who have held resonance bonds have claimed everything from land grants to political appointments to requests for law changes. One notable case involved someone claiming the right to marry into a noble house despite lacking proper lineage. Kavak processed that, his diplomatic training finally engaging with the situation. So this bond isn't just ceremonial, it's actual political power." "Exactly." Sarath manipulated the hologram, highlighting specific nobles in the court hierarchy, "which is why several factions are very nervous about your presence. House Vex, for example, has been positioning themselves for a marriage alliance with the Queen for years. Your bond complicates that strategy significantly." "I didn't ask for any of this. I just pulled someone out of a decompression zone." "Yes, but you pulled out the future Queen, which means you're just has rather significant consequences." Sarath's compound eyes reflected multiple images of Kavak, making it feel like he was being observed from dozens of angles simultaneously. "Tell me, Commander, what did you think when you saw a Zarathi soldier about to die?" "Your honest first thought." Kavak leaned back against the wall, remembering that corridor, the alarms, the smoke, the rush of air toward the breach. "I thought, I can stop this. Not should I, not what are the tactical implications. Just that I had maybe 10 seconds to seal that bulkhead, and if I did it, someone wouldn't die." "Fascinating. Why?" "Because that kind of immediate, instinctive response to preserve life, even enemy life, is not common in Zarathi military philosophy. We value honor, courage, tactical brilliance, but saving an enemy who would have gladly killed you moments before." Sarath's antennae moved in a pattern Kavak couldn't interpret. "That suggests either profound stupidity or profound principle. The Queen believes the latter. Others are debating." A second chime interrupted them. Sarath's posture shifted slightly, his antennae rising in what seemed like alert attention. "That's the Queen's personal signal. She wishes to see you." Kavak stood, checking his appearance reflexively. "Now, I just got here." "She's the Queen. Now is always an acceptable time for her." Sarath moved toward the door. "Come." "And try to remember, primary right-hand gestures carry formal weight. Secondary hands are for casual emphasis, and never directly contradict her in front of others unless you have information she lacks. That last part is important." They moved through corridors that Kavak was starting to recognize, though the palace's organic architecture made conventional navigation nearly impossible. Guards nodded to Sarath, cast uncertain glances at Kavak, and maintained positions that suggested they were very aware of the human moving through their secured spaces. They arrived at a chamber that was clearly private, smaller than the throne room, with furniture arranged for conversation rather than ceremony. The bioluminescent walls pulsed with softer light, and actual windows looked out over the capital city as it transitioned into whatever the Zarathi considered night. The crystalline spires were beginning to emit their own light, creating a cityscape that looked like captured starlight. The queen stood by one of the windows, her back to the entrance, 4 arms clasped in a posture that seemed contemplative. She wore different robes now, deep blue rather than ceremonial violet, simpler in design though still marked with the golden patterns of royalty. When she turned at their entrance, Kavak noticed her antennae were relaxed, less rigidly formal than in the throne room. "Sarath, thank you for bringing him. You may leave us." Sarath performed the 4-armed gesture of respect and departed, leaving Kavak alone with the queen in quarters that felt distinctly personal rather than official. It was one thing to stand before her throne surrounded by hundreds of nobles. It was another to be alone with someone who ruled an empire and whose life he'd saved in a moment of chaos 5 years ago. "Your quarters are acceptable?" she asked, moving to what appeared to be a Zarathi sitting area, cushions arranged in a circular pattern that accommodated their different physiology. "Confusing but functional. Your people brought me a human cot, which helped. But I understand our furniture is not designed for your skeletal structure." She gestured with her secondary left hand to one of the cushions. "Please, sit. We need to talk without the court listening, and I've disabled all recording devices in this chamber." Kavak settled onto a cushion that was surprisingly comfortable once he figured out the positioning. The queen took her own seat with fluid grace, her 4 arms folding in a posture that his instincts read as open, non-threatening. "You're confused," she said. It wasn't a question. "Massively. This morning I was a retired officer teaching tactics at the academy. Now I'm in an alien palace, bound to a queen through a law I didn't know existed, and apparently holding enough political power to make noble houses nervous. And you don't want any of it. I didn't save you expecting payment. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Yes, you said that in the throne room." Her antennae tilted forward in that pattern he'd learned meant focused attention. "But you must understand, Commander, that phrase, the right thing, it translates poorly into our language. We have concepts of honor, duty, obligation. But this instinctive moral imperative that guided your action, that's distinctly human in expression. You don't have soldiers who would save enemy combatants. We have soldiers who might spare defeated enemies under specific honor codes. We have traditions of prisoner treatment and surrender protocols. But grabbing an enemy who is actively dying and sacrificing tactical advantage to preserve their life." She made a gesture with her primary hands that seemed to indicate complexity. "That is rare enough among our people when applied to our own, applied to enemies. It simply doesn't happen." Kavak absorbed that, trying to understand the cultural gulf it implied. "So when you realized what I'd done, what I was? Human, yes, clearly enemy based on your uniform and the weapon you carried. I experienced something close to what you would call cognitive dissonance." Her compound eyes caught the light from the windows, fracturing it into rainbow patterns. "Every tactical training I'd received said you should have left me to die, or more likely, killed me yourself to ensure I couldn't return to the fight. But you did neither. You saved me, sealed the breach, and disappeared into the chaos before I could even process what had happened. I didn't think you'd remember. It was just a few seconds in the middle of a massive battle. Those few seconds haunted me for the rest of the war." She leaned forward slightly, her posture intensifying. "Every time I ordered an attack on human positions, every strategic decision I made, I thought about the human in that corridor. Wondered if he was still alive. Wondered if my orders would kill him. Wondered if all humans were like that or if I'd encountered an aberration." "And which conclusion did you reach?" That I needed to understand humans better than our military intelligence allowed. That perhaps we were fighting people we didn't truly comprehend." Her antennae moved in a pattern that seemed like frustration. I began studying your culture, your history, your philosophical traditions. Learned Terran Standard, consumed human literature and strategic theory. And when the armistice came, when I ascended to the throne 2 years later, I continued studying. Kavek saw where this was leading, felt the weight of it settling into place. That's why you summoned me, not just to honor a debt. The resonance bond is real and sacred. I will honor it absolutely. She gestured with her secondary arms, a more casual emphasis. But yes, you're correct. I summoned you because I need someone I can trust who has no stake in Zarathi politics. Someone who's proven capable of seeing past species and uniform to recognize another being in need. You're surrounded by advisors, generals, diplomats, all of whom have agendas, alliances, ambitions that color their counsel. Her primary right hand made a cutting gesture. The peace between our peoples is fragile, Commander. There are factions on both sides who want the war to resume. Every trade negotiation, every diplomatic exchange, every cultural program carries risks of misunderstanding that could escalate into renewed conflict. And you think I can help with that? I think you understand something that my court doesn't, that the other side of any conflict is populated by individuals, not just enemy assets. That sometimes the right choice transcends tactical advantage. She stood. It's both. The resonance bond gives you the right to ask me for anything equal to the life you saved. I'm asking you to spend that right helping me preserve millions of lives by ensuring the peace holds. She turned to face him fully, her compound eyes reflecting his image 1,000 times. You can refuse. The bond allows that. You can claim something simpler, wealth, land, position. Or you can help me finish what your split-second decision in that corridor started. He thought about the battle of Threshold Station. The friends he'd lost, the ships destroyed, the desperate fighting that had nearly ended humanity's expansion into space. Thought about returning to that, about both civilizations bleeding themselves dry over misunderstandings and fear. If I agree, what exactly would I be doing? Learning our culture deeply enough to serve as genuine liaison. Attending diplomatic meetings and providing human context my advisors lack. Identifying potential points of conflict before they escalate. Essentially, being the bridge between our peoples that no official diplomat can be, because you're not bound by either government's official policies. She paused, her antennae tilting in what he'd learned was emphasis. And you'd have my protection, my resources, and access to information that could actually make a difference. Your court already resents my presence. This would make it worse. Probably, but I've spent 3 years navigating their resentments. I'm comfortable with that discomfort if it means preserving peace. Her mandibles moved in that almost smile. Besides, you pulled a dying soldier through a bulkhead door in the middle of a battle. Dealing with noble house politics should be comparatively simple. Kavek laughed despite himself. That's terrible logic. Perhaps, but you're still considering it. He was. Despite every rational argument against accepting, despite the complexity and danger and sheer improbability of the situation. Because the Queen was right, his instinct in that corridor had been to preserve life, and that instinct didn't stop applying just because the scale had changed from one person to millions. I'll need resources. Cultural education far beyond what Sarath's planning. Direct access to you for questions without going through bureaucratic channels. And honestly, I'll need you to trust that I'm not going to always give you comfortable answers. Agreed to all three. She extended her primary right hand in what Sarath had taught him was a formal gesture of alliance. I don't want comfortable answers, Commander. I want honest ones. The kind that might prevent our peoples from returning to war, because we failed to understand each other. Kavek took her hand, or tried to, his human grip awkward against her very different anatomy, but they made it work. Then I accept, though I reserve the right to point out when you're making decisions I think are mistakes. I would expect nothing less from the human who violated every tactical principle to save an enemy's life. She held his hand a moment longer, her compound eyes unreadable but her posture suggesting something that might have been relief. "Welcome to the most complicated political situation in the galaxy, Commander Kavak. Try not to accidentally start any wars. No promises. I accidentally created a sacred bond with a queen just by pointing at the wrong person." Her laughter was a complex harmonic sound that the translator struggled with, but the meaning came through clearly enough. They stood together by the window, Human and Zarathi, looking out over a city built by a civilization he'd fought against and now needed to understand. Somewhere in the palace below, Sarath was probably preparing educational materials. Somewhere in the court, nobles were plotting against the human who disrupted their careful political calculations. And somewhere in space, both their governments were trying to figure out what it meant that a retired soldier had just become the unofficial bridge between two species that had barely stopped killing each other. Kavak thought about that corridor 5 years ago. The split-second decision that had seemed so simple in the moment but had rippled forward through time to reshape his entire life. The Queen had asked if he remembered her, and the answer was complicated because he remembered the act without remembering the person. But he was starting to understand who she was now, a leader trying to navigate impossible politics while holding onto principles that transcended political convenience. "Do you remember me?" she'd asked in the throne room. The question had seemed simple then, binary, yes or no. But standing with her now, watching bioluminescent light reflect off crystalline spires in a city built by hands that had never evolved on Earth, Kavak realized the real answer was more complex. He was beginning to. Not just the soldier he'd pulled from decompression, but the queen who'd spent 5 years thinking about a moment of unexpected humanity in the middle of inhuman chaos. And maybe that was enough to start building the understanding that could keep their peoples from returning to war. "Your Majesty," he said, testing out the formal address, "I think I'm going to need a lot more cultural briefings. We have 30 days before the next major diplomatic summit." Her antennae moved in amusement. "Sarath will have you fluent in court etiquette by then, or expire from the attempt, possibly both." "That's not reassuring." "It's not meant to be. But you saved my life once, Commander. I have faith you can survive Sarath's educational methods." They stayed by the window as the city's light show intensified, and Kavak realized that pulling someone through a bulkhead door had changed more than just that moment. It had changed trajectories, opened possibilities, created connections that might determine whether two civilizations learn to coexist or return to mutual destruction. His datapad chimed with another urgent message from Terran Command. He ignored it. Whatever they wanted to say about political implications and damage control could wait. Right now, he had an alien queen to help navigate peace, a court full of potentially hostile nobles to survive, and approximately 3 decades of cultural context to absorb before someone expected him to be useful. Just another day in the most improbable diplomatic assignment in human history.